Hi guys, Matt Thornycroft here from Lead Without Position. And today we're going to talk about how leaders handle feedback. Feedback is the absolute best way to improve. Just like learning from a teacher or an expert, you can massively shortcut your progress by learning from people who have already done what you're trying to do. And feedback allows you to really understand where you are and how to improve going forward. I'm sure many of you have heard Ken Blanchard's famous quote, "Feedback is the breakfast of champions." And it is fundamentally true. By taking on feedback, you can really establish where you currently are and identify any areas that are going to stop you from achieving your goals or progressing in your career. So, how do leaders handle feedback? Well, the first point in handling feedback is to first understand what they are saying and don't be defensive. It is so easy to fall into the trap of protecting your own ego when someone says something negative about you. When someone provides feedback, it can feel like a personal attack and triggers a response in us that says, "I'm not good enough and I need to prove myself." The result of this is that we often find ourselves wanting to defend our position and justify why their feedback isn't true. For example, if someone says that you didn't do a particular good job on a piece of work, you can find yourself wanting to justify either why that isn't true and scrambling for reasons to say, well, actually, I did this part and this part correctly, or by removing that part entirely and saying, well, I did these other things right, so why are you bringing that up? Unfortunately, all this does is make you come across defensive and that you're not willing to listen to what people have to say, especially if that person is more senior than you and more experienced. It can make it seem that you don't want to have their advice. So the first thing is, don't fall into this response pattern. Take a step back and really understand what they are getting at. So, does their feedback actually have any merit? You'd be surprised at how often we are really bad at recognizing our own behavior, and other people can recognize things that you don't know you're doing. The most common examples of this are how other people perceive us. One person might think they are being really friendly, and the other person might think you're actually coming across rather condescending. A complete dissonance between what you think is going on and how other people perceive your behavior. Feedback allows you to bridge this gap. It allows you to recognize that you might not be that great at recognizing your own behavior, and other people can help you get on the right path. But you have to be willing to listen to it and recognize your own shortcomings. This can be extremely difficult to do, but what leaders are great at is recognizing that other people are able to help them. They recognize that they're not perfect and they haven't got everything figured out, and other people are going to help them improve. So when you receive a piece of feedback, the first thing to do is understand it. So if someone says, for the same example, that you come across condescending, have a think about whether or not that really could be true. So first think, do you have somewhat condescending thoughts? Do you actually think you are better than people in this way? Because even if you don't say it, the fact that you think it can come across in your behavior. And then when you've thought about it, the best thing to do is ask the person for examples. And again, don't do this defensively. Use sentences such as, "Oh, I didn't realize I was doing that. Have you got an example of this so I can address it and change my behavior?" This makes you come across to the other person that you're really taking what they're saying on board, even if you at the moment don't agree with it. What you might find is that other people are perceiving certain ways that you do things negatively, and you don't realize that they're going on. In this condescending example, it might be that you're going to people and saying, "It's okay, you'll get there," to someone who is of the same grade as you or the same level, and actually you aren't that much better than that person, but you seem to be coming across like you're superior. You might have thought, actually, you're being nice to them and saying, "Don't worry, you'll get there," but that's not how it came across. So by understanding why this person is giving you that feedback allows you to bridge that gap between what you think is happening and what is actually happening, or at least being perceived. The second point in how to handle feedback is don't fight feedback unless it is factually inaccurate. The reality of life is that you are going to get some rather bizarre feedback. One of my absolute favorite examples of this is where one person told me that in meetings I drink too loudly from my water bottle. Now, I didn't think this was particularly true, especially because I had a screw cap one, not a drinking bottle. Nonetheless, there was really no point in fighting it because it was so unnecessary that by fighting it, I would have looked really petty. It also didn't mean anything. It wasn't used in an appraisal or impacted my ability to progress in my career. So actually, with examples like that, you've just got to find the funny side. And a lot of the time with this feedback, it's often a reflection of them more than it is a reflection of you. For example, I had another one where I got told that I'm really disorganized and I need to be on top of my work, when actually all I missed was one piece of work and I did the other 20 or 25 pieces to do. The interesting part was this was someone I was working for who was never on top of anything, was always late for everything, and was a complete mess. So actually, by understanding the feedback, I recognized that that was more of a reflection of them than it was of me. And when they saw that one piece of disorganization, they jumped on it because they were ultimately projecting. So again, if it's not really going to impact anything, there's no point fighting it. There is an unfortunate truth with feedback that if you get into a fight, even if you win, you lose. If you brawl in the mud, you're going to come out muddy. And you can't go into fights without coming out with scars. And these scars might be people's perception of you, that you might be someone who can't accept feedback and has to fight and challenge every piece that they receive. Or it might be emotional scars for yourself, where you feel like the company doesn't value you and doesn't understand you, so why would you work hard for them? So with feedback, leaders accept it gracefully. And the only time to challenge is where there are really no examples of this behavior, or where the example given was nothing to do with you. It might be that the person giving you the feedback misunderstood the situation and jumped to a conclusion. After all, we are all human and people make mistakes. So if you have received factually inaccurate feedback, it's important to challenge it in a positive way. Again, not being defensive, because if you come across defensive, they will also get defensive and start defending their example when it's actually untrue. A way to handle this is by asking them to clarify the situation and explain to them that in that example that they're given, that actually wasn't you that did that piece of work or said that particular thing. You in no way challenge the person, you purely challenge the example. As soon as you start challenging their character, that causes conflict. But if you challenge behavior, you can't really argue with facts, even though some people like to try. And by saying that actually the example you've given here doesn't seem right to me because I wasn't involved in that piece of work, have you got a different example of this feedback? Because this wasn't anything to do with me. If they can't think of anything, then it's important to say, okay, so is this feedback actually about me? Because I can't think of a time where I actually demonstrated what you're saying. Most of the time, people will accept that they got the wrong person in this scenario and actually be like, okay, yeah, actually, if that's not anything to do with you, then I can't think of an example about this. But what you've done is you've handled the situation, challenged positively, and ensured you didn't arise any conflict. Unfortunately, there are still people that will just carry on with the feedback even when you've shown that it wasn't anything to do with you. In these situations, generally there's nothing you can do because these people have just blinkered themselves and accepted that that's the way things are, and you're not going to change their opinion. Hopefully you've got mechanisms and processes in your company or place of work that allow you to bypass these situations. But hopefully by adopting the practices that I've shown, it hopefully won't get to that point. And my third and final point in how leaders handle feedback is to create an action plan. So when you've understood the feedback, not got defensive, and really taken on board what they are saying, then the best thing to do is create an action plan on how you're going to address that feedback. It is so important to acknowledge how you feel about that feedback given. If you can see what they are saying and you understand them, but it's made you feel angry or sad because you don't want to come across bad in any particular way, then take the time to feel that. It's okay to be sad that you haven't done as well as you wanted, or that you've been coming across in a particularly negative way, but don't let it fester. Don't sit on it and stew on it so that it grows into either a depressive behavior or into really negative and resentful feelings towards the person that gave you that feedback, or to the company in general. Leaders are able to recognize their own shortcomings, so they aren't immune to the feelings that come with that. They take that on board, they recognize that they aren't as good in this particular area, and then they create an action plan on how to move forward. For example, let's say you get feedback that you are particularly disorganized, and you recognize that you aren't on top of your work like you should be, and that you are missing pieces of information and having to ask managers to repeat themselves. Before the feedback, you thought that you were getting along fine, and then when they gave you the feedback, they were able to explain that it's really annoying that they have to keep repeating themselves and annoying that you are missing pieces of work. So you've understood, you've taken it on board, and now you need an action plan. So the first thing to do is look at what are the basics to dealing with organization. These are things like creating a to-do list, setting yourself daily goals, and planning your day properly. If you're already doing that, I would wonder why you're missing tasks, but then you would have to think about how do you move forward? And the best people to ask are the ones who are giving you this feedback. If they can recognize that you're disorganized, then hopefully they have the answers of how to become organized. This is even more effective when the person that you ask is also demonstrating the behavior that they've told you, like in my example where the person themselves was really disorganized. By asking them what you can do to improve, you're also flagging to them what they need to do to improve, which hopefully will cause themselves to trigger improvements in their own behavior. But ultimately, by asking the person that gave you the feedback, you can come across like you are really listening to them and taking on board what they say, and then showing that you are proactive and willing to improve by asking for their advice. And then when they give you advice, even if you don't agree with it, demonstrate that you've done something about it, that you have created this action plan and you've started adopting this behavior. This puts a positive impression on them. And if they are in charge of your appraisal or even your career progression, then they now have a positive view of you, that you take feedback well and are willing to take it on and improve. So these are my top 3 things on how leaders handle feedback. If you like these, let me know in the comments below. And if you have any other examples, also let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, hit that like and subscribe.